Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caitlin Bassat, and I'm the Kamloops Youth Facilitator with the Invasive Species Council of BC. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight for part 2 of the Plants Under Pressure workshop. This workshop is being presented by ISCBC Youth Facilitator Torin Kelly. During tonight's workshop, participants that attended part 1 are invited to share their plant press, discuss their experiences, and ask questions. If you missed part 1, don't worry, because we do have the recording up on YouTube that you're welcome to view later. So I hope you all had a chance to sign in early and get any technical glitches worked out. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can just write a note in the chat box, and our ISCBC technical support will send you a private chat to assist you. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, just feel free to pop them into the Q&A by clicking on the Q&A tab that's located at the bottom of your Zoom window, and the host will answer any non-speaker related questions in the chat. Now, to begin, we'd like to find out who is here and where you all work or where you're from and what your areas of interest are. So if you haven't already, you can please type your name, workplace, or area of interest in the chat box, and then we can review them while I'm introducing Torin. So at this point, I am pleased to give a very warm welcome and introduction to Torin Kelly, who's presenting this workshop. Torin started working with the Invasive Species Council of BC in 2018. He is passionate about teaching and helping people gain new skills and tools to make a difference in their community. Torin attended BCIT for forestry and natural areas management, and then specialized in invasive species. How are you doing tonight, Torin?
Still can't get the hang of that unmuting thing. I'm doing great, Caitlin. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Well, I will pass the workshop over to you, and I hope everyone enjoys.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Caitlin. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to part 2. For those of you that were here last time, hello again. And for those of you who might just be joining in for the second part, welcome. I'm happy to hopefully go through some stuff quickly that we touched on on the first part of this webinar, Plants Under Pressure webinar, and go through some of the stuff that I've done. And hopefully, like Caitlin said, I would love it if you guys would be up for sharing your experiences with plant pressing, whether it's in the past or whether it was over this past week, whatever that looks like. Before we get started, I'd like to start by recognizing that I'm currently presenting this to you all from the traditional unceded territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Chemainus First Nations. And yeah, let's get this party started. So, oh, wrong way. There we go. This is a collection of my herbarium, and I don't know if I used the word herbarium in our last, in the last part that we did, but basically herbarium is just a collection of my plant pressings with those added details that we spoke about. So location, date, collection, you know, sometimes you can go into pretty great detail about biogeoclimatic zones, so on and so forth. But I wanted to just quickly run you guys through some of my past pressings, because something that kind of came up near the end of the last part was whether or not, how long these might keep. And if you press them super well, if you press the plants, you get all the moisture out of those plants, these things will last pretty well forever. And you can look at a lot of the Royal BC Museum has some really great examples of plants pressed from the 1950s and even further back and up into the present time too. And the big thing with this is, like we discussed before, it's a good way to kind of look back in history. So these plant pressings that I have here that I'm showing you guys were the first plant pressings that I had done, and this was in 2016, and this was for a class that I had. Now, one of my first ones was this. You can see it here on the left side here. This is Queen's Cup. This is one of the very first plant presses that I did, and I was super happy. It turned out very well. If you guys have seen Queen's Cup before, the flowers aren't that kind of weird yellowy white that we see there. They are like beautiful and white, but discoloration can happen when we're pressing these plants. So that's just another thing to be aware of. And the one on the right there is a fern there, and ferns are one of my favorite plants to press because they almost always turn out super well. And the fern that I pressed in the last one with you guys, it hasn't been mounted yet. I got all the tags all ready to go. I need to go buy some more of this photo cling paper so I can actually start putting them into my photo album right now. But it pressed super well. The leaf that I flipped over, so we can see the back of the leaf, we can see all the pollen that's on there, which is super great for identification tool. Speaking of which, the next one we have here. So this was a super interesting one when I first started, because I was a bit taken aback at this plant. Now, the one on the left here is Canada Goldenrod. I'm sure you guys have seen this around. It's pretty common, at least in the Lower Mainland. And the reason that I was super surprised about this is because if you didn't really look at it, or if you didn't know, you might not see that this was the same plant. And I actually took these samples of this plant at the same time. I was a little amiss when I pressed. So the one on the right hand side of this goldenrod sample I have, I pressed first in my plant press, and the one on the left I pressed second. So they seem to look different. They have a couple different attributes. The flowers didn't press very well in the first one, whereas the second one, we can see the nice yellow flowers of the goldenrod. And there could be a number of factors that that could have happened here. The one that I think might have happened is with this first sample I pressed, my press was completely full. So they might not have been able to get as much pressure on the plant, whereas the second one I pressed, it's a smaller sample. There might have been fewer plants actually in my press, so I was able to get the pressure across it. I was able to press all that moisture out faster, and that's why the flowers looked like they were preserved a little well. But at the same time, this is a good indicator of what we might see in this plant. It might have been pressed correctly, or it might have just been at a different stage in its growth, so it could have been pressed that way. Now, maidenhair fern, like this is a big example why I love to press ferns, because there's so many different ferns: maidenhair ferns, deer ferns, bracken ferns, tons of ferns native to BC. Maidenhair fern is one of, I think is one of the prettiest ferns. It's one of the weirdest looking ferns, I think. If you guys just, after this, just Google maidenhair fern. It doesn't look anything like all of the other ferns, because almost all the other ferns, what they'll do is they'll sprout right from the base, right from the soil, and they'll shoot up with all these fronds. Whereas maidenhair fern shoots up a very kind of thin black stem, as you can see in the slide there. It'll shoot up, there'll be no greenery up until a certain point, and then they'll fold out. And they have these really distinct little leaflets on there, as you can see. So that's one of my favorite plants. But as you can see here, I remember this very distinctly. This was a plant that I picked, and there wasn't a lot of those ferns left. It was late in the season when I actually collected the sample. So that browning of the sample didn't happen in the press. The browning had already happened before I even picked it. So that was something that I recognized, and I didn't put it in the notes there, but in my more detailed notes that I had put that in there. So when I looked back, I could realize that it wasn't the pressing, it was when the plant was collected. Okay, so just quickly go through this. I'd love to talk, as you guys already know. So the plant on the left here, the Rosey twisted stalk, I spoke about, you want to collect all the different factors you can, all the different identifiers that you can when you're collecting these plants. So I was fortunate enough to get this sample of this plant as well as a berry. Now, obviously, when I press the berry, it isn't going to be this perfect circle, and I'm not going to know exactly what it looks like when it's in the field, but you can get the rough estimate of its size, what the seeds look like, roughly what the color might look like. So that's just another good reason we want to try to collect berries. And it was brought up in the last one, if we can, best case scenario, we want to collect roots of these plants. So when we do go, we have even more identifiers. We want leading stems if we can. So for stuff like trees, if we can get the leading stem on there, as well as just leaves. Leaves are a big identifier, as you guys already know. And Pearly Everlasting is just this kind of, to me at least, it's just this very out of the blue kind of plant. When I first saw Pearly Everlasting, I was just, why is it white? So that was a big, I couldn't believe it, because all I was seeing around were all this green foliage, and there's this like really nice flower out of nowhere. So I love that plant too. All right. You guys saw this sample very quickly the last time, but the sample on the right here is Fireweed, one of my favorite samples that I've taken, because it has that really nice purple color as well, still to this day. And a big reason is that I've kept it in my book and I've kept it out of the sunlight. That's another thing that was brought up in our last session too. So stuff like this, as well as paintings, sunlight can kind of drown out the colors. It can steal the color away from those samples. So making sure to properly store your plant samples as well as properly pressing your plant samples. And I saw a comment in there where to get this photo cling paper. A great place to get it is somewhere like London Drugs, maybe a local scrapbooking place or a local place that might print photos for you. There's a good chance they have all that, because it is basically just a photo album, and it's photo album pages with that kind of cling page to it. And I'd be happy to find some spots. I got mine from London Drugs. And the other sample we see on here is the Oregon Grape. Kind of, once again, I was able to get those berries, just another identifier for that. And some more ferns that I'm very happy with. And I just really wanted to show you guys, I really wanted to kind of nail home that if you guys do get some good samples and you get you get your pressing down great. And the first time, if you don't, your plants may not press perfect or whatever it is, it's okay. But once you kind of get into the groove of things, these plant pressings and these plant samples can last years. As you can see, it's been 4 years since these plants have been pressed, and I've kept them away, in a fairly dark and dry place, so they haven't been able to, lose their luster. But yeah, they are kept super well. Now, there isn't good without bad, so I just wanted to quickly go through some of the stuff with my most recent plant pressing, some issues that I've had, just to, throw it out there. I'm not perfect. As you guys, you might think I am. I'm definitely not perfect. So a couple press plants that I had broke. I tried to take them off of my plant press. They were very thin. One of them was a fern, unfortunately, broke in half. Now, it's not a problem. The fern broke in half, so I was easily able to just put that back into one of my, display parts. But another one I had, the leaves, a lot of the leaves started breaking down the middle of the leaf. So it kind of gets difficult because these samples can be quite fragile when you're taking them off of the paper, and it might be a method that I'm not doing properly. So that's something I'm going to look into. And if you guys have had the same experience, I'd love to hear it after I'm done going through all my issues that I've had. But yeah, so the next one was that, and I mentioned this quickly, and I've had the exact same problem in the past. My English holly sample that I collected did not press very well at all. Didn't press very well, and it started to get mold, so I put it back in there, and the same thing happened. So that sample, unfortunately, it's been thrown into a garbage bag, and it's been sent off to deep burial for invasive species, and we're gonna have to try again another time on that one. This next one, my equipment broke, so I was being a little bit tough on it. I was trying to get as much pressure on it as I could. So I broke one of my straps on my plant press, and I was able to repair it, but I think I'm gonna have to buy a new one. I think that might have been a reason why some of my plants weren't pressed perfectly. And I actually just threw another belt, an old belt on there just in case too. So we got more evenly distributed pressure. And my hardhack lost all of its color because I left it out. I was so happy with that hardhack plant I had from last time. The colors were perfect. So I basically put it in one of those photo cling papers, and I was going to display it for you guys. And I left it out on the table in front of the big window in my house. And I went back to it, and it had lost a fair bit of its color. And it can happen very fast. I've never seen it happen that fast, but it happens. So being careful to make sure that you are properly storing that is paramount, basically, when you're hoping to keep these samples for a very long time. Now, that's my experience with this most kind of recent plant pressing. I'd really, really love it if you guys, even in the chat or the Facebook chat or the Zoom chat, just let us know if let me know if you had any issues come up that I didn't bring up, or if you have any solutions to some of the issues that I had, whatever that looks like. I'd be super happy to kind of open this up. And if you'd like to come on and have a conversation, talk to us, we can nominate you as a panelist and you can come on and talk to me and about your experience with this. I'd be super interested to hear how everything went with you guys.
Torin, we had another question in the chat too that I'm sure we can take time to answer now. So Gail is wondering, when you have items in your press that require different drying times, do you wait until they're all dry, or do you pull them out as soon as they are done drying?
I personally, I'll take the plants that I can see are, fairly flat and well pressed, because I like to get them into that kind of display fairly quickly. I have a fairly short memory, so I like to get my little labels done. I like to put them in my display pages, and I'd like to get those samples in there right away. Realistically, the only thing that I might see become an issue, and that might have been what happened to me, is leaving them in there for too long might actually basically glue them to those thin pieces of paper, and it might be a little harder to get them off of that paper. I don't know for sure, but that's something that I noticed, was the samples that I had in there that were a little bit thinner were harder to get off. Yeah.
And then Rob had a couple comments. He says, don't hold the press vertically because flowers, needles, or anything loose may fall out and be lost. So always hold it horizontally, which is a great tip.
I wouldn't even think to mention that, but yeah, that's great. Absolutely. You want to make sure that you're keeping everything in the plant press for sure.
And then Amanda tried using watercolor paper, and it kept the moisture in there a little too long, so she wouldn't suggest using that type of paper.
Oh, well, Amanda, I'd love. Did you have bad samples, or what exactly happened with that? I'd love to hear more, because I know we discussed the different types of materials we could use, and that was something you brought up. So I'd love to hear more about that too.
And then Linda just shared in the chat that she tried to press a sample of, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Piperia transversa, also known as Royal Rain Orchid, and it did not look like an orchid when I took it out of the press. And yeah, I would imagine because orchids are such an intricate flower, they'd be really hard to press.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. You might get the side profile of the orchid, or you might get the front-facing image of the orchid. But yeah, a lot of flowers are quite intricate. Not a lot of stuff is symmetrical. Like a daisy might turn out a little bit better, whereas an orchid isn't as it isn't as symmetrical. So it might be harder to press it perfectly so we can use it as an identifier. But that's a big reason why we have like you said, you put the scientific name in there, your common name, where you collected it. So we can use all that information as well as the pressing to have a pretty well-educated guess in the future as to what the plant was.
And then Rob has some more great advice. He says, don't use any paper that is shiny or waxy, since it won't absorb moisture. So stick to blotting paper and or newspaper. And myself, like when I was back in college, we just used newspaper, and it seemed to work okay. And then Amanda said she had some roses from a bouquet that I was preserving from a friend's wedding, and with the rose that I left some of the stamens in, and it looks a tad moldy. Interesting.
It has, sorry, you were pressing, the stamens. Oh, okay.
It's interesting.
I wish I had a solution for that, but I haven't run into that issue before. I wonder if the petals might be too thick, or
Yeah, maybe, because if you think of a rose has so many layers.
Yeah,
it'd be a hard one to get all the moisture out.
Absolutely.
And then Linda's wondering, could you partially press the flower and then rearrange the partially pressed flower using tweezers? I think you totally could.
Yeah,
I'm thinking like when I see people who make like the greeting cards with the pressed flowers, like often they use pansies, and yeah, often you'd have to like rearrange the petals on, and they create different art out of that. So
yeah, you definitely need to get them before they were like completely void of water. So yeah,
right.
partial pressing and rearranging might do the trick. Definitely. That's a great idea. Okay.
Now, if anybody wants to come on and show some of their plants that they pressed, just pop it in the chat, and then our ISCBC technical support will allow you to share your video.
Yeah, and
Don't
if
be
you
shy.
guys, yeah, if you feel free to, it might be a lot for you guys. We recognize that, but feel free to just come on. If you can share your video, just quickly show us with your front-facing camera, if you're on your phone, or if you're on your laptop, you can just show us your sample. You don't need to talk or anything. You can put that in the chat. We would just absolutely love to see what you guys have done. Amanda, welcome.
Oh, I almost forgot to unmute myself. Hi.
How's it going?
Pretty good. So yeah, I'd actually started preserving some plants because I wanted to try and do something in resin with them from my friend's wedding. So I thought, oh, this would be a good time. So I don't know if you can see how well this worked, but this is the rose I was kind of talking about.
Oh, okay.
So it actually still kind of feels like it almost feels damp in there. I don't know if I'm just crazy, but other than that, like other than the discoloration, it worked out really well. But the individual petals that I did, so I actually pulled one apart and did individual petals. Those worked out really, really well.
Awesome.
So they turned out fantastic. They didn't have as much discoloration, and they should work really well.
Okay.
So hoping. I'm just pulling apart some other pieces, and some of the flowers that were really delicate ended up coming apart, but with resin I can kind of piece them back together, so I'm hoping they'll be okay. But yeah, the one rose I'm not 100% sure. The other one's stuck, so I have to figure out how to get off.
Stuck, yeah.
I use parchment paper.
Really?
I use parchment paper between the two layers, and then put watercolor and newspaper on either side.
Okay.
And then smushed it with cardboard, and then made my own press with plywood. I got a friend to help me.
Nice.
So yeah, it ended up working out really well. It only took me a couple hours to make it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one I don't think watercolor paper is a good idea. I thought I'd try it because that's all I had.
Yeah.
But I think it kept too much of the moisture in there.
Oh, come on.
Because sorry. My husband's playing a video game. But when I checked them about 3 days ago, after having them in the press for about 3 days,
yeah, dude, I had them.
They were still really damp. So, and the watercolor paper obviously took some of the moisture, but I think it was holding it in there too. So I would not suggest that for other people.
Well, thank you for taking one for the team here. I really appreciate that. That's great. It's great to learn, right? It's great for everyone to kind of get that experience and learn not through failure, but learn through experience. Learn through experience. Thanks a lot for coming on, Amanda. I really appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amanda, for sharing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Torin. I just noticed we've got Rob has a couple more tips for us.
Great.
He says most paper has some level of acid, which will eventually degrade the sample, which I'm guessing those photo cling papers are probably acid free. So those are great to go with.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also says that if you want to preserve the specimen for 100 years, then get rag paper or 100% copper or cotton from herbarium store online or other specialty stationery place. Those are great tips.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rob. That's awesome. And yeah, we want to try to keep these samples as long as we can, and we want to get our collections up so we can use these in the future for identification or for looking back and seeing where plants exactly grow. And one thing I didn't really touch a whole lot on, which is a little weird since I work for the Invasive Species Council at BC, but these are good tools to preserve not only our beautiful native species, but also invasive species. And that's so we can look back and see, okay, did we have invasive species in, this particular spot at this particular date? And that we can actually use that information to slowly see where these species are moving and you know, pushing through the different, you know, the change in climate and using all these different factors to see exactly how these plants might be moving historically and in the present. Yeah. And I was super in, it was a great example, Amanda. I know I was speaking pretty quickly about different ways that we can use these pressed plants, and whether or not we want to just use them as identification tools, or if we want to use them as historical tools. We can also use them as art tools. So we have a lot of people that are artists and maybe not necessarily super into the scientific, you know, cataloging of plants, but we can use them for, you know, putting them in resin for the wedding. And I'd love to hear more about that, what your plans are for that, but you can put them in art pieces. And Caitlin, you were talking about the
like the greeting cards.
Greeting cards, yeah. So there's tons of ways that we can use these different pressings. I'm just more inclined to use them as an identification tool because I love learning about all the different plants around me. And I'm not a very artsy guy, unfortunately, but yeah, if anyone else wants to hop on and talk or put it in the chat, I'd love to discuss some more with you guys on your experiences in the past. Whether it was last week or whether it was years and years ago. I'd love to share that knowledge with everybody. Just gonna grab some water, hold on. Clover. That's a good plan.
Rob is asking if he can send us a pic of his pressing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have the picture, I could, if you could send it to my email, I can send you that, Rob. I'd love to display it for everyone if that's okay with you. Gonna put it in the chat for you, Rob, if that's okay.
Yeah, Rob said that's great.
There you go, Rob. Looking forward to see that. And if anyone has any questions about maybe the first part that we did, Plants Under Pressure Part 1, or if you have any questions on what we've kind of already discussed today, we want this to be fairly collaborative. So we love to air some of those issues that you might have had or questions of future pressings. And I totally forgot to do this quick poll, guys. I wanted to see. I'll put the poll up now, but did everyone get a chance? I didn't even ask. Did everyone get a chance to try plant pressing? I'd love to see what you guys where you guys are at. And for those of you, if you're watching on Facebook, love if you want to just see this and then put into the chat whether or not you have, or if you have plans on it. Give it another 20 seconds here.
While we're waiting, Torin, Linda put a great comment in the chat. She says, when she was a little kid, my mom and I pressed flowers between wax paper using an iron. They lasted forever. I still have some of them. We did not dry the water out of the paper before we pressed, but the plants did dry and then they were sealed in the melted wax paper. That's really cool.
Wow. That's awesome. And Linda, if you still do have those, like you said, we'd love to see them. I'd love to share them if we could. That'd be super awesome. Another good way of pressing and kind of displaying these plants. That's awesome. So it seems like we're kind of split down the middle here, guys. Some of you guys have already pressed plants and some of you have not yet pressed plants. So I hope this this workshop that we've done today is kind of pushing you to give it a go, because it doesn't need to be just for identification tools. It can be used for lots of arts and crafts. It's awesome. All in your storage locker. Yeah, that's. I bet it's in there. Yeah, that's awesome. Great. And then, oh, here we go. Ooh. Okay, let me just put this up here for you guys to see. Rob, thanks again for sharing this. Oh, it's loading up here. Let me just share my screen. Things only start being an issue when you don't need them to be an issue. Okay, awesome. Share the screen here. Hope you guys can all see that. Oh, there we go. I'd love it if you wanted to comment on the plant press or the pressing here, Rob. I'd love to hear more about it too, if you don't mind, of course. Subarctic north of the tree line. My word. Yeah, and there's that detail down there. Hey, Rob, very important. And what was the what was your purpose of collecting this plant specifically? Was it just for your personal collection, or was it for a project? Hudson's Bay. Oh my word. Hobby and interest. Wow. Well, that is a gorgeous sample. That is amazing. 6 years ago. And like you said, it's all about how you store the plant. And I thank you so much for bringing up that even just regular printer paper or however you're going to store it might have that negative effect because there's that acid in there and it could slowly start to eat away at those plants. So that's another big reason why I use those photo cling paper because those are acid free, particularly for storing photos, but it works just as well on the plant as well. Great. Well, thanks again, Rob. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Sweet.
Yeah, that was great to see a plant specimen from a different part of Canada too.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thanks, Torin, for this great workshop. And thanks to everyone that joined us tonight. And thank you for sharing your plant pressings and all your great comments. I know myself, I really enjoyed hearing all about them, and I'm sure all the participants did as well. So a big thank you on behalf of those listening and on the ISC. Just a heads up to everyone, we will be sending out a short link to an evaluation survey. So if you could please fill that out, that'd be great, so we can get your feedback and ideas for future workshops as well. Also, if you're between the ages of 15 to 30, we do have a youth volunteer program with the Invasive Species Council of BC. So we are actively inspiring youth across British Columbia to take action against invasive species in their communities. And they're being involved in many exciting and meaningful service opportunities in their communities as well. So to join and also to find more information about the council, also if you'd like to become a member, you can visit our website at bcinvasives.ca. And again, a big thank you to everyone, and thanks to Torin, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks a lot, everybody.